I want to introduce our speaker today. With 15 plus years in the film and entertainment industry, she spent most of her time within Pixar, heading a production team to making several Oscar-winning films, WALL-E, Monsters, Inc., and The Incredibles, yes. And after these 15 plus years, she decided to go on her own thing. She felt there was a gap in the market for a great organization, so she founded it and currently is directing Camp Real Stories. Please help me welcome Ester Pearl.
I'm Esther, founder of Camp Real Stories, and we are a media program for 13 to 18-year-old girls based here in Oakland. And I've been working in the film and media industry since I was 16, so a little bit longer than 15 years. I'm 40 now. And as Yvonne said, I spent the bulk of my career until 2008 at Pixar, where I worked on Monsters, Inc., The Incredibles, and WALL-E. Before that, I was in visual effects in LA. And I left in 2008 to make the incredibly lucrative decision to go to grad school. So you leave one of the greatest companies in the world to go to graduate school. And I had 2 kids while I was in graduate school, also something I don't recommend. So I know a lot about failure, actually. I got my MBA at the Presidio School, which is a sustainability program here in the Bay Area. And for the past 3 years, I've been working on and for my organization, Camp Real Stories. I live here in Oakland, where Camp Real Stories is based with my family, those 2 now annoying and yet adorable children, and my husband and our dog. When Yvonne talked to me about speaking for Creative Mornings, I was like, yeah, that sounds great. And then he was like, the topic's failure. And I was like, awesome. It's terrifying. And then I have sort of a sheer, just general fear of public speaking. So like my anxiety level is pretty high right now. But luckily, I am used to working with teenage girls. So if you guys could basically not acknowledge my presence and have sort of a look somewhere in between boredom and a sneer, we should be fine. I'll feel right at home. So I mean, even this is more than we normally get. I'm like, can you nod your head so I know you're alive? That would be great. And then sometimes say something really profound that we're like, you haven't spoken in a week. Okay, now I'm supposed to do something with that information. So, you know, I wanted to center this talk knowing that this was a creative audience. And sort of in the industries I've worked in, we hear a lot about failing early and failing often. But that's not always sort of put into practice as well. And I really sort of thought about that concept a lot. And I started doing some research, and I found all sorts of these sort of inspirational quotes that you'll find on posters designed to ignite leadership. Our greatest glory is never failing, but rising up every time we fail. And Michael Jordan seems to be quoted a lot on these things. And they, you know, they're like, the attempt is to sort of like pull your team up after a particularly ego-slashing mistake. And there's like literally no shortage of them. But most of them, they're overwhelmingly male and mostly white. I did find one from Oprah, which doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. Think like a queen. A queen is not afraid to fail. Falling is another stepstone to greatness. Okay, if you're Oprah. But I had to like search really hard to find one from Oprah and J.K. Rowling. So, you know, I mean, there's nothing wrong with looking towards our like leaders and seeing that they've made mistakes and we want to learn from them. But, you know, if our lens is from one viewpoint, overwhelmingly male, our viewpoint of leadership is really narrow. And I've always looked at failure and mistakes as opportunities for improvement and really a pathway to innovation. And if we're only allowing a certain segment of our population to be risk takers or innovators, we're missing out on a huge segment of our population. And so I really wanted to focus this talk today on the idea of the privilege of failing and learning from those mistakes, and hoping that we can kind of create an environment where everyone has the privilege to fail. And this is, you know, a widespread issue through many aspects of our society. But for the past 3 years, I have been targeting an area that has been particularly ostracized from failing or being innovators, and that's women and girls in the media. So right now, 2014, only 16% of decision makers in the media are women. So 16%, it's a pretty small percent. And another way of looking at that is like 84% of the films that we're seeing, the stories that are being created, the characters that are being developed, and the films that are like actually out in theaters are from one male viewpoint. And I actually haven't spent a ton of time in episodic television. I've done a little bit of work in it, but I thought it would be better. Not really sure why. But I just figured there's not as much monetary risk to take on a director, to take on a new director in episodic television. We seem to have thousands of television stations. So I was pretty surprised when I started the work that I'm doing to find out that episodic television is actually worse. Only 14% of directors are women, and only 2% of those are women of color. So no wonder when we turn on the television, we only seem to be seeing one viewpoint. And, you know, maybe you think, like, that was 84%. This is a really creative industry. So maybe they're coming up with, like, really diverse and dynamic characters. But they're not. Right now, for every girl you see on screen, you see 4 boys. And the saddest part about that for such a creative industry is that's been the same since 1948. Since 1948, every time we've seen a girl on television, we've seen 4 boys. So that number alone is just sort of really daunting, because it's weird, when I walk around, I see about 50% women and 50% men, and this room seems to be sort of broken up into sort of a pretty diverse group, but yet we still don't see that portrayed in our media. Here's another chart which kind of shows similar stuff, like that you may or may not be aware of. Women are 3 times more likely to be in sexually provocative attire in the media. If a career is central to a protagonist's storyline, 80% of the time that person is male. And for young girls, like children's media, 80% of the time a career is presented to them, the career is princess. It's not really a great aspiration. It's just not, I mean, even however you feel about princesses, it's just not really that plausible. Like, you can't really go to princess school and meet, you know, and it doesn't seem like many princesses are happy, like real princesses, not Disney princesses. I don't really want that for my daughter. So, you know, part of what my thought process around this is, you know, there's another lens that we often use at camp and in society to sort of just determine whether a film has sort of equal representation, and it's called the Bechtel Test. Is anyone familiar with the Bechtel Test? So for those of you who aren't, it has 3 parts. The film must have, you know, 2 or more women in it, and they have to have names. They have to talk to one another, and they have to talk about anything other than a man. Like, these do not seem to be really huge hoops to jump through. But here's just a little sampling of films that don't pass the Bechtel Test. You know, one of my films is on there. Some of these films have really shaped our pop culture. You'd be hard-pressed to find a single superhero film that passes the Bechtel test. And this test is not a great test. Like, it doesn't tell you if it's a good film. It doesn't tell you if they're great female characters. It tells you that they have names and they've spoken to one another. And most films do not pass the Bechtel test. Go home, try it at home. You'll be surprised. But, you know, one of the thoughts that we often hear in the film industry and media industry is films about women and girls don't do well. So that's why, and girls and women don't go to the movies, and boys won't go see movies about girls. Turns out in 2013, that's been very wrong. So films that did pass the Bechtel test, and once again, these aren't great films, did twice as well at the box office than films that did not pass the Bechtel test. And, you know, in this particular year, which has been a great year for the work that I do, we had a little film called Frozen that came out. It made over $1 billion. It broke every single box office record. The 2 protagonists, 2 are both women. So clearly some boys went to go see that movie. You know, so my son loves Olaf. So, I mean, it shows that if you make good films, people will go to them. And so for me, the real problem here is not, you know, just about, you know, we want more girls in films, is that, you know, when you have such a gender disparity and an overall lack of diversity in an industry that is prevalent, prolific, and influential, you end up with a serious vacuum of leadership that extends beyond the media. Our young people, the young people we work with, are taking themselves out of the game of life before they even know the rules. And when they're teenagers, they're already limiting their hopes and dreams and aspirations to the stereotypes they see presented to them in the media. And I've been looking at this failure and seeing an actual treasure trove of opportunity. So in 2012, I formed Camp Real Stories. And in 2013, we had our pilot year. And so my organization's mission is that when women and girls are better represented behind the scenes, they'll be better reflected on the screen. And we achieve this mission through our summer camps and soon-to-be after-school programs, where we teach girls how to make their own media, view the current media critically and thoughtfully, and really to aspire them to be leaders and change agents. So in 2013, we had our pilot summer. We had 30 girls that wrote, shot, and edited 6 films in 5 days. And then this past summer in 2014, we over doubled in size. So we had 70 girls that came through our program. And they learned from professionals in the industry. So that's Brenda Chapman, who won the Oscar for Brave. She's the very first female animation director teaching the girls about narrative film. Jen Bradwell, who's a documentary filmmaker. sound designers, Danielle Feinberg, editors, and then they write, shoot, and edit their own films. And then along the way, we also teach them media literacy. They get to really start to view how they can be change agents in the film industry. And we do a lot of leadership training. And trust me, it's no easy feat to teach about 3 dozen girls in a week to make a film in 5 days. But it's just as difficult, and I actually would say probably more so, to get them to break down the walls that they have to put up to just go through life. They all come in, all of them, with a complete and utter terror of failure. They feel like there's no room in society for them to make a mistake. And we have to break that down really quickly, because otherwise they're not going to get to a finished product in the end. We had one of our returning campers this year, so she's come to camp twice now. She's 16, she's brilliant, and she was freaking out on the first day of camp, and I was trying to get her to calm down and explain to me what was going on. And she said that she felt that she had to write the most perfect film ever, or otherwise it was over for her. And I was like, it's summer camp. You're 16. Let's lower the bar a little bit, because where do you have to go from here? If you write the best film you've ever written in your life during a summer camp, you only have one trajectory. And so, I just sort of sat with her for a little while longer, and she just said that she knows how few female writers there are out there, and if she's not the best that she can be, she'll never have another opportunity, and she'll be letting down her entire gender. And that's not an unusual thought. It happens in camp. And it's heartbreaking to see the pressure that these girls put on themselves, but at the same time, I totally understand it. I've been the only woman in the room. I'm sure many of you have been the only person representing your ethnicity, your race. And if you're the only person there, you can't really necessarily make a mistake, because not only will it be detrimental to your own career, but you also may be sort of cutting off a pathway to future people coming up behind you. So we, to encourage girls in our camp to get over this fear of failure, we have had to work so hard to create an environment where mistakes are not only encouraged, but they're sort of demanded. So we actually only establish one rule at camp, and that is once they form a production company, which they do on the first day of camp, they're not allowed to break up. So they have to work through whatever conflict that they have, and in a constructive way. They're each given an adult producer that helps them guide them through the filmmaking process and kind of help navigate any conflict that comes up. But, they really have to work it out. We have 40% of our girls that are on financial aid. We do active outreach all over the Bay Area and beyond. We actually have girls who've come from out of state. So these girls are really different. And there's a lot of, differences that come up. But none of them have ever not made a film. So they all get through whatever they need to get through. They don't all want to be best friends at the end of it, which is totally fine. That's actually really important to learn, that you have to not be best friends with everybody. But they all really love the process. And since we've had most of our girls, 50% of our girls come back, it's, really shows that this is an environment where they're allowed to sort of create colleagues. And we also encourage our campers and our professional volunteers to look at the Camp Real Stories community as their professional network. This allows our girls to see that, these statistics are daunting and frankly depressing. But this reality is it's an industry filled with people who are ready to encourage and bring up the next generation of storytellers. There's no one that's really excited that they're the only woman that's doing what they're doing. They would like to have more diversity in their workplace. And through this, we are able to dispel 2 myths that are always sort of overemphasized in the media. One is that women can't work together, which we all who have all worked know that's not true, but you very rarely see that mirrored for you in the media. I've seen more sort of hair pulling and table flipping in the media, which I've never actually seen in my professional world. And that, the other myth is that women in positions of power are intimidated by other women. And these young women get to be mentored by some of the leaders of the industry. And and that mentorship continues long beyond our 5 weeks in camp. And then finally, in this 1 week of camp, we get to show the girls that, that they're on the cusp of new technology, that they no longer have to break into sort of a studio system. Between the internet and social media, their film, the media is now democratized. They just have to pick up their camera and be able to tell a good story. That's also sort of key. And their stories and ideas do have value, and there's a huge audience that's out there that's waiting for them. And for those of you who may be thinking, well, how does this affect me? I'm not a girl in the media. This camp was started sort of very self-serving. I have a son and a daughter, and stereotypes don't discriminate. And I'm just as concerned, my husband and I are just as concerned with how these stereotypes affect my son as they do affect my daughter. And we that could be a whole nother talk about how what's happening to boys in the media these days. But it's really important that if we don't have a media behind the scenes that looks like our society, we're not going to end up with a society that we want to look like. Our boys are feeling a lot of pressure to fit into stereotypes that are so archaic. So, I thought, if you guys would allow me to, I'd show you one of the films we made in camp, and then we could just talk about that really quickly afterwards.
One, two, three, four, five.
So I can regale you with lots of stories about how different those girls were and how they did not really want to work together on the first day. And so, from Monday to Friday, they were able to make that amazing piece. And that's a lot because we were able to create an environment where not only mistakes and failure was encouraged, but it was demanded. They had to work through whatever conflict that they had. And, the reality is if we keep up this status quo in the media, this huge gender gap, both behind the scenes and on the screen, we're not going to move the needle towards equal representation in Congress, in the boardroom, in the C-suite, in the STEM fields, because if our young people are not seeing it, it's going to be almost impossible for them to be it. So for those of you that are working in creative industries and are really thinking about innovation, I encourage you to look at your team and make sure that you're allowing your team to create as many mistakes as you are sort of giving yourself approval to make mistakes. And make sure that that team looks different than you. It can be really uncomfortable to work with someone who comes from a different background than you have, but it will end up with like a better product, more, the bottom line will be better and all of those things will be better. And if you are, have young people, start encouraging them to start taking an active participation in the media that they're both intaking and outputting, that encourage them to tell their own stories and that they have a lot of value. And there's a lot of people out there that are waiting for them to get their stories on the screen. So, if you want to see more, the film that I just showed is it's a great representation for this talk, but I would say of the 20 plus films we've made, we also have a horror film, we have sci-fi. It just shows that the girls, this is I cherry-picked this one because it goes with this story, but it shows that girls also have a wide range of interests, and so not limiting their interests. And you can go to our website and you can see all the films there. If you have any other questions about how you can get involved in Camp Real Stories, if you want to send a camper to Camp Real Stories, feel free to email me. So thank you very much.